Well, I wanted to welcome you guys and ladies to the final micro learning session of this series. It's been a content packed series that we've been diving out these or divvying out these different content sessions with pieces to help move your IT business from through the different maturity phases of IT that we believe will push more and more your MSP to be a value driver for your customer base rather than it being viewed as a cost center. So that's the ultimate goal of everything that we do for our customers is value driven and not just to check off a box on their profit and loss form or their balance sheet or whichever one of those financial documents outlines their regular ongoing costs that they have. But this session, we really want to dive into kind of putting a lot of the pieces together that we've been talking through. There's going to be, recurrence of some of the pieces we've talked about in the past to really create that customer IT roadmap and how to tie that into the annual strategy sessions and the quarterly business reviews. So we won't focus a whole lot, although, we'll throw some tools your way on pieces to help with the actual structure and format of those meetings, as much as we're going to talk about kind of the the logistics of the content that's in there and really how to approach the mindset to approach it with. So I think once that content and everything is in place, the format and structure is kind of a lesser importance than getting the actual good content in place. So let us dive in. So, this really focuses on the continuous improvement phase of the relationship. So when we kind of talked through the customer engagement life cycle, again, just to kind of recap that, going through the pre-sales prep, and then the discovery meeting where we're getting our first look at the prospect's environment, what's there, what security issues exist there. We come back to them and we measure their, what we've discovered against the technology assessment, and kind of measure that against what our recommendation tech stack is. And then we put all of that into our recommendations meeting. Here's how we want to get you from where you are now to where you say you want to be. And so these are the pieces we want to do. This is the technology we want to put in place. Please sign on the dotted line. They sign on the dotted line. And then we get to actually putting those pieces in place. The tech stack adoption, again, that's the sheet where you lay out what your ideal technology is, from the firewalls to the servers to the workstations to the switches. What are your minimum requirements for whatever fills that? If it does meet the requirements but is not your ideal provider for that, that sits in that mid-range to where it does eventually find its way onto the IT roadmap. So we'll, again, that's what we're going to kind of talk through, how that comes out in the QBRs and strategy sessions. Then once you've gone through and put the projects in place for the tech stack adoption, you're doing the onboarding project that we talked about, I think 2 weeks ago, refining and improving that documentation and the processes, and that gets you into the QBR annual strategy session cadence that you will repeat as the years go on and you're 30 years in and the customer's been satisfied with you the whole time and you've had 120 different meetings and it's been a fantastic relationship, right? That's the great end goal, right? So let's dive into what that looks like. Anybody relate to this person here and kind of what they're thinking? I've been emailing my client to schedule the QBR for 3 months now with no luck, right? That happened to anybody? Jill's nodding her head. Anybody else had this happen? Usually a lot of that is diving into, right, priorities. It's busyness of your client. And so a lot of these things we can start changing the mindset of these QBRs and what they exist by starting that conversation off correctly, right? So when you're in these meetings, right, it's going to be something where you start out strategic and not so much tactical, right? You'd start big picture before you start talking about, if you start describing, the bark on a tree to someone who can't see, right? They don't know the full context of what they are. They may say, I don't care anything about bark. Why are we talking about bark? But if you talk, we'll say you're in the middle of the forest, and when the bark gets to us, once the trees get to a certain level, you're almost out of the forest. So then bark becomes very important because it establishes where you're at, right? So those strategic conversations, not the tactical, are where you start, because you start with the high value questions and topics, and then you want to establish those priorities, and then you can reinforce with the services that you're offering and the roadmaps, and kind of put that plan in place on how, again, to get from where they are to where you agree that you want to be with that customer. So kind of some examples of lower value tactical questions and comments, not to say they aren't, important in the right context, but you don't start off with these. So these are lower value tactical questions. Things like, well, we closed X number of tickets for your employees this quarter. Okay, cool. Our real-time monitoring is still in place and helping us proactively troubleshoot and protect your systems. Okay, cool. In fact, here's a 75-page PDF report that shows you all the alerts and tickets that we managed for you. All right, now I'm asleep, right? So if these are your typical QBR type conversations, I do not blame your customer for not wanting to schedule these, right? These are really low value technical or tactical type comments. Again, helpful, and they need to know these things in a summary type form, but you don't start out there. So higher value strategic questions and comments, you want to start out with things like, have your short-term or long-term business goals changed recently? What's changed since the last time we've talked goal-wise? How about any new business directions you're looking for? Are you pushing towards any new milestones? Say, maybe you want to accelerate your business growth and hire 3 times the amount of employees that you normally have to hit a specific staffing milestone or a specific sales milestone, whatever that looks like. That's going to have an impact on the technology side of your business. What challenges are you seeing in the day-to-day that might, thwart these goals or milestones or disrupt getting to them? What's your tolerance for data and cyber risk? This is a fun question, especially in this day and age when they're seeing, every other day a pipeline or a city government or somebody is getting hacked and getting ransomed. And so this is, believe me, becoming more and more, even if it's not being talked about, your customer is thinking about it, and it's consuming a lot of their, if they're paying even halfway attention in this day and age, they're aware of that risk. And so you want to be broaching these topics, even further fleshed out. If you had an incident, what applications or data would need to remain online? What would you need to be restored as soon as possible? And, which data and systems could you lose forever in the event of an incident? That really kind of puts the rubber to the road in the conversation with your customer when they think about that cyber risk. It's, the reality is, you truly could, if not protected correctly, lose data and systems permanently. So those conversations need to happen to make sure that the expectations and the goals of the customer are in line with what you're providing them. And so these start to open up that conversation into budgeting and into specific projects that you're putting in place. So as an overview, that's kind of where you want to start. So when we talk about some of the logistics of the actual meeting, who do we want in that meeting? How do we want to approach the personnel in there? So you want to define and classify your client engagement segments. You're going to have to define time budget, because you can't go schedule 100% of your customers with QBRs in one day or in 1 week, right? You can't. The time allotment's not there to do that. And you definitely want to gear your meeting towards the specific personnel that are there. So anybody familiar with the ABC analysis? Is that familiar to anyone? So you've heard of the Pareto, the 80-20 rule, and this sort of comes out of that. This is more of a manufacturer type philosophy, to where you take your revenue, 100% of your revenue, and you look at, the makeup of the products. In typical 80-20 fashion, usually 80% of your revenue is driven by 20% of your products. And so that manufacturer terminology can be applied here, to where you're looking at, the top third of your MRR is going to be a smaller segment of your high touch customers. That becomes your A group. That next third is your, kind of your mid touch group. That's going to be a little bit larger group. And then probably your largest group of customers, making up a lot of that 80% of the remainder, is going to be your low touch customers. So the goal is you schedule with your A group first, because that's going to be your primary revenue driving customers. Moving on to the B group and then the C group, with the goal of scheduling 33% each month, because quarterly is every 3 months. You schedule a third, with the priority given to your A group. So that's kind of how, that's one way to go about scheduling out and kind of prioritizing your time with your customers. So when we talk about personnel in that group, there's a number of different roles that typically end up being in these meetings, and they skew, as shown in this matrix, from left to right, the tactical to the strategic, and then from the bottom to the top, going from technology up to the holistic, the business as a whole, from what they're looking at. So the different roles in these meetings: IT coordinator, office manager, those are going to be more on the tactical side, either specific for technology or kind of looking at the whole business tactically. And then on the right side, your CEO and CFO, COO operational roles. So the CFO, COO being more on the strategic, from the technology isolated side, to then the holistic CEO viewing the whole business from a strategy standpoint. So they're going to be looking for and trying to answer, hoping to have questions answered, such as the office manager: is the staff able to effectively use the technology? Is the technology running smoothly without interruption? IT coordinators are more focused specifically on the actual specifics there. CFO: is the technology being managed in a cost-effective way? And then the CEO more: is the technology supporting the overall growth of the company? And so with those different roles, you see a different side of what they're trying to hope gets accomplished out of these meetings. If you aren't addressing those questions in those meetings, again, that may be part of the problem in getting these things scheduled in a timely manner, is because the value is not being connected. The dots are not being connected of the value in these meetings from a technology standpoint. So just to recap with our DISC conversation from last week, this definitely comes into play here, and the skill set of being able to adapt to different personality styles is super valuable, especially in these meetings. So just as an overview, that dominance and influence and steadiness and conscientiousness, depending on the personnel there, you're going to have varying degrees of direct communication, and varying degrees of if they're kind of guarded in the way that's released, or more open with that conversation. So pay attention to that and adapt to that style depending on who is in that meeting. So just again, from an overview standpoint, these roles typically sit with an office manager being an SC type personality. IT coordinator, again, they're that technical role. That's a CS. CD from the CFO or COO, really highly analytical, but very driven with that. And then your CEO in that DC type personality style. So look at those styles, make sure that you can see how you can adapt that conversation to the person you're talking to. It'll really help with keeping them engaged in the conversation, helping them engaged in the information being presented. So cool. So we get into the logistics of when. So obviously you want to have this scheduled at a time that's convenient for the customer. You don't want to be, if a customer, for instance, like you're a tax or accounting firm, don't try to schedule that April 15th. Just don't do it. Be aware of what's convenient for your customers. Those type of things are important. And then you want it to be at a time when the stakeholders are available and alert. So a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I'm a big fan of the author Daniel Pink. He has several books that have been incredibly insightful. Drive is a massively beneficial book that I've read on kind of what motivates people. So definitely check him out. But this specific book called When dives into the hidden science of timing. So he dives into tons and tons and tons of research and connects those to principles that you can use. But the way this plays into your QBR meetings, you'll see here in a minute. But in this book, he outlines a study of Danish school children. They found taking standardized tests. They compared the same kind of sampling of A to lower performing students taking their standardized tests in the morning versus the same kind of arrangement and allotment of students taking that test in the afternoon. And the morning students performed quite a bit better than the afternoon counterparts. Breaking this into the medical realm, doctors found an average of about twice as many polyps during colonoscopies performed in the morning versus those in the afternoon. Definitely schedule your medical procedures for in the morning. That's what this is telling me, I think. And then from the legal side of things, judges rule in favor of prisoners about 75% of the time early in the day. And then by the late morning to the afternoon, that drops to nearly zero. So if you're getting a hearing or something in a legal case, again, morning earlier is better. How does this apply to the QBRs? Breakfast meetings, they tend to yield the best results from the stats that we just talked about. But also people tend to not have meetings scheduled for first thing in the morning. So you're not going to have a whole lot of conflicts because people don't want to do that right out of the gate. And so that is usually open and something that can get on the books there. And then always, nobody dislikes the person that brings coffee and food. So, for that extra mood boost, bring coffee and bagel, something simple, but you get brownie points, you get kind of benefits from being the person that brought and was mindful and thoughtful and helpful to that person that rushed out of the house without that first cup. So just some tips there from a meeting perspective. And then again, we talked about the timing of it, but be mindful too of your customers' fiscal years and then their budgeting calendars. You don't want to do an annual strategy meeting in the middle of August if July 1st was the beginning of their fiscal year, because budgeting and stuff like that can be a little bit more difficult. You want to try to schedule those around when you can actually affect change in the budgeting process, and keep that in mind. Also, know your clients. If their calendars are a lot more taxed, you may end up doing less than the four quarterly kind of like clockwork meetings, because 3 calm and highly effective meetings a year can be a lot better than 4 rushed or ineffective ones. So make the meetings count, but know your clients and how that kind of fits in their schedule. So just some things around the logistics of when. So what's the difference between the annual and the QBR? So when we talk about the annual strategy session, this is more of a roadmap for that next year ahead. And then the QBR should be used as kind of a milestone or progress check based on what was put in place from the annual strategy session. Also, give the opportunity for addressing any issues or challenges that arise during that period. But for the most part, you're doing those status checks, those progress checks in the QBR that you've outlined from the annual. So let's dive into the annual strategy session and just some of the pieces we want to see that typically should be included in this. So kind of number one is your IT infrastructure roadmap. So you want to show what current projects you're working on and the status that they're in, along with any other upcoming projects that are already on the schedule. These have typically already been budgeted, but are just waiting to start for time, time's sake from a technical standpoint, or waiting on some particular thing to happen from the customer's perspective to kick off that project. But this shows that that roadmap and what's already in either in progress or already scheduled. That will go along with the IT infrastructure plan, budget plan. So you're going to match what's already on the calendar and what's on the schedule, make sure that that's still included in what's been budgeted. And then this budget plan is going to be referenced throughout the rest of this strategy session for takeaways from these different sections of any projects that arise. It's going to have to be matched against that budget plan to see where that money is allocated for the projects that are generated from this. So the tech stack adoption is one that we've already talked about of how it plays in, but when we talk about the tech stack adoption, it's the minimum guidelines versus what's in place currently. So if any of these products that have kind of gone into life, if they've dropped below the minimum guidelines, or there's the time and the budget to adopt these into your preferred technology, these would be ones we look at if they've turned critical and can we budget or schedule these for this next year ahead. So that is how these apply to the IT roadmap and how they get on that schedule. So you're constantly referencing that tech stack adoption and seeing how that fits into moving their technology forward. Highly recommend an IT infrastructure risk assessment. So this is super similar to the ones that you run on the front end of the prospecting the customer. So if you've got rapid fire tools, if you've got security assessment tools, run these just to show, and I even like to show a comparison between where you started from a IT infrastructure risk perspective. Do that security assessment from your prospecting phase to where you're at now, and compare and contrast the two and show the customer, hey, here's where we've made progress with your overall security stance, so that you can show movement towards securing their, building their and boosting their security stance. Hardware lifecycle. So you'll, a lot of companies, you want to get them on a regular cycle of refreshes. We've talked about, I think in the past with hardware, especially in the tech stack adoption, that having hardware that's under warranty is a minimum requirement, in my opinion, because of the difficulty of sourcing hardware. Sometimes you want the manufacturer to be sourcing that hardware and getting you the verified and certified pieces to replace, and let someone qualified to work in the hardware replace that for you, rather than that become part of your labor costs. And so hardware life cycle being under warranty is hugely important. And so part of that conversation in the strategy session is going to be about any that have come up for warranty renewals, or if that time has come to refresh them. If you're on a refresh cycle, don't do all your hardware all in one year. Again, divide it up equally amongst your time and get those replaced on a more regular schedule to where you're doing an equal bit each year. Through that life cycle, you can also come up with catalysts for new technology projects. If it's a server going into life, this may convert into a conversation about cloud, may convert into a conversation about if this is, for instance, like a file server, maybe you're going to put this in some other format. You're going to put it in maybe in SharePoint. You're going to put it in another type of format, and perhaps not even look at replacing that hardware as much as just having a technology project to adapt it to something else. Business application selection. So this is going to be, it's a similar kind of track as the hardware lifecycle, but on the software side. So you're going to pay attention to, this is big in the line of business applications, to where there are support agreement renewals that come forth, because a lot of the higher level line of business applications required specialized support for particular issues that come up. You want to make sure that those stay under renewal. and the support agreement stays in place. It's also a time to talk about the challenges or any catalyst for new business app projects. So maybe a business application's been around for 10 years and you want to look at moving this to a more cloud-centric or SaaS type application. This is a good time to have that conversation on what challenges are there or what catalysts are coming up, especially if the manufacturer of the software no longer is going to support that going forward. If it's an end-of-life product, it's a good time to have those conversations about the catalyst for change. Data and business intelligence. This is a big time strategic conversation. The type of questions asked are to your strategy type personnel is what data visibility would help your business run better. So this can be on a financial side, this can be on a productivity side, anything from think outside IT with these specific questions. So it's how much is your manufacturing personnel spending on X task in their manufacturing process? So think holistically on your business, on their business, and how that data and business intelligence can really help drive productivity, can drive cost savings, can drive those things forward. This is going to be a big one that will help drive that value of you as the IT provider. And then lastly, on the office productivity, what time sinks are your customers, users seeing in the technology that we might be able to help with? So these are things that may just be annoyances that don't, warrant, from the user's perspective, don't warrant a ticket or a service call, but they're things that they've just sort of dealt with, like the crab in a pot of boiling water, right? It's just gotten a little bit worse and a little bit worse and a little bit worse. And it's a time to just ask that question to see if those things that maybe your office manager has heard, Bob over in the corner complain every 3 weeks about how long it takes his email to load, but Bob's never put a ticket in. And so these are some things that can kind of be spurred from those type of questions. So on this, what did we accomplish? We want the accomplishment at the end of this to look like we showed the customer that we're moving them forward. On the roadmap, we're moving them forward on specific things. We've identified a list of projects that they can include in their budget for the upcoming year. We've continued to move them towards our preferred technology stack. Again, we've talked about in several other sessions the benefits around standards and how this helps us from a service perspective. We can resolve issues faster if we know if it's on our specific technology we're familiar with. The costs, we know what they are, and there's even better in the technology stack moving from capital expense, such as what we do with our monthly firewalls with WatchGuard, tools like that. You can move away from a capital expense to an operating expense. All those things go into benefits from moving them into our preferred technology stack. And then we show again that we're moving towards a high value business partner rather than a cost center. This is what we need to remain competitive with the other IT companies and managed service providers out there. Any questions specifically on kind of what we've covered so far? I think I heard an open mic, but I don't know if that was for a question or just something else, but cool. So, okay, we've done the annual strategy session. And so now again, our quarterly business review becomes progress checks. It becomes times to just bring up any issues or challenges that have arisen during that time. So your quarterly business reviews, you're going to review, like the name says, right? The IT roadmap and budget, you're going to review the progress that's happened in those particular projects. Mauricio, do you have a question there? Mic is open there. Let's see. Cool. You're going to look at with IT roadmap and the budget progress, you're going to look at the projects that are currently on the roadmap and that are on the schedule. Make sure the budget is in line. Any overruns, anything like that, you're going to review at the quarterly business reviews. Best practice adoption progress. So these are pieces, the processes do end up finding themselves in the tech stack adoption. And so I kind of outline this differently because these are not specifically cost prohibitive, or they don't require, budgeting. These are just pieces and processes that can be put in place at any point. So are these business processes being followed? So for instance, anything like your new employee onboarding, your employee termination kind of review, are these being followed in a timely manner? What pieces are coming in place? Who's not following the process? Those type of conversations can happen there. And then on the security, the software compliance side, what's the best practice from a security side, from a software compliance? You're looking over those and showing where that is in line or where it's not. So for risk reviews, this is security and backup kind of play a large part in this. So we want to show an overview of backup success and testing, places where we can show kind of an overall, well, the backup is, completed 100% of the time, and we've tested the backups and the tests succeeded. So you are, covered, and that risk from a backup perspective is not there. That risk is low because we have actually tested everything in place, excuse me, is working. From a security alert trends, we want to see anything that tends to trend a certain way. If we're seeing certain incidents in a certain space, if we're seeing tickets from a security perspective show up increasingly in a certain area, this is something we want to look at addressing. We want to look at potentially there is an increase in the security stance that needs to happen from additional products that need to be put in place. If we're seeing phishing attacks on or if we're doing our phishing training and an increasing amount of people are failing those phishing attacks, it may broach a topic to where we want to put a phishing prevention tool in place to kind of increase that security stance. So we want to look through that and address these with the customer during these QBRs. Service ticket and satisfaction review. It's not going to be a 75-page report, but we do want to see an overall volume type reports and user satisfaction reports. So we want to see how the service department is handling volume. Is volume increasing in tickets, and that less tickets are being closed same day? We want to see that this overall volume is either staying steady and the way it's being handled is staying steady, or that it's being addressed in some way. From a satisfaction review, we want to look for exceptions there. We want to make sure that overall user satisfaction is positive, overwhelmingly positive, and dealing with any outlying incidents or negative feedback. If all the negative feedback you have is for one specific person and all the rest of the feedback is overwhelmingly positive, this is the time to have that conversation, because every customer has that, that person that you can't make them happy no matter what. And so I think having those conversations with the customer at these reviews is a good time to say, hey, I don't know what the deal is, but Sam over there just doesn't have a positive thing to say about us. Can you help us out with maybe what he's seeing, what challenges he's seeing? Because we're seeing 99% of everybody else have positive feedback to us. So maybe either it's just Sam or somebody on our team just hates Sam. Let's get to the bottom of what's happening here. So those kind of conversations can happen during the QBR. SLA review. So whether this is contractual or not, or if it's just an objective type piece, it's a good thing to review on the basis of, how long are the users waiting? And then are we seeing challenges from a prioritization standpoint? If certain personnel are waiting for what they deem are high priority tickets, it's a time to have that conversation. If from an MSP's perspective too, if you've kind of divided up your service levels between 3 different offerings, the gold, silver, platinum type format of pricing your products, maybe your platinum has a higher or has a shorter response time on the tickets. And so these conversations can lead to broaching the topic of, well, if you're only paying for a bronze or a low level SLA and you want faster response on your particular tickets, maybe this is the time to have the conversation of upping to the next level package to kind of get your expected response time. So these are places where that conversation can happen. From a technical review, again, we're not going super deep into details. We're not listing out, every machine and every patch that was installed on every machine, but an overall effectiveness of the patch management, how many machines are patched, what percentage that health is at, and then any exceptions that are showing up, you want to kind of look through and talk through those pieces. Maybe there's exceptions because there's software that's end of life, or there's a particular incident with a machine that needs to be re-imaged, something like that. Things like that that don't come up in the normal conversation, but in a QBR could be a topic of conversation. And then from the network uptime or alert trends, just overall performance of it, showing that you're, how little time hopefully their network's been down, and any alert trends that we're seeing that need to be addressed. User training, any trends with tickets that user training would help resolve. If Frank in engineering can never seem to figure out how to access a shared mailbox in his Outlook and has to call every week and have someone show him, and he doesn't seem to grasp the information, and that's a ticket that comes in every week, maybe we broach the topic of helping Frank with Outlook training, and to where you can help permanently resolve this weekly ticket that comes in with user trainings. These are a good place to kind of broach that topic. And maybe you don't point out Frank specifically, but just saying overall, your user base might help with this particular training that could help cut down this type of ticket, and they could keep their work going rather than wait, the hour or 2 hours for support to get back with them. And then lastly, we're going to talk through challenges, any pain points that have come up, since the last meeting. Pain points that could be addressed with either improvements to the new or to the existing service, or potentially could see improvements by adding a new service to that particular customer to kind of, again, drive value and increase productivity, decrease work time, increase efficiencies, those type of things from the QBR standpoint. So at the end of the QBR, we want to say that we accomplished a few things. We want to know that we understand any of the changes in the customer's business that need our attention. We want to show how we're taking care of their environment. We want to show the services provided, and that we are actually providing those services through the overview of the ticket review, of the uptime, of all the kind of the progress checks that we have showed throughout that QBR process. Any recommendations we have talked about for improvement, we want to make sure that those were outlined in the QBR process. We accomplished highlighting the progress on that IT roadmap, where the projects have progressed, what's upcoming, those pieces, and then how we are improving how we have a strategy for improving continuously within the customer's infrastructure. Cool. So again, I said we weren't going to focus a whole lot on the actual format or structure of these. We do have a few tools that can help from our strategic partners to kind of shorten the process of putting these in place. The first one here is BrightGauge, which is a reporting dashboard through ConnectWise that can kind of automate the process of creating these reports that we might show during the QBR. Again, we don't want a 75-page every ticket listed type report, but a lot of these can kind of summarize that information without having to take a ton of time to collect the information from multiple different places. This kind of puts it all in one place in a format that is easy to pull before you run to a QBR. Manage the Service platform also has formatting for some of these QBRs to help put a template in place and a dashboard in place to make that simpler to to get out without spending a ton of time to pull that information. And then rapid fire tools, as we talked about from the security assessment standpoint, from a network assessment standpoint, we usually see this used in the prospecting side of things, but I do highly recommend showing these same reports and how you've taken that customer from where they were when you prospected them to where they are now, and just seeing that continued improvement there. So again, those are good tools to kind of shortcut a lot of this process, to kind of maximize your time and to actually having the meetings and not just pulling the information for the meetings. So that is all of the information for the QBR and annual strategy meetings. I wanted to open it up for any questions that anyone has or comments on either this topic or kind of anything as of a whole in this whole series. If you have questions or comments, wanted to open it up at this point.
Content.
Awesome, thank you.